One of our guys entering the stadium had a big wad of those cards in his pocket. The police asked to look at what was in his pocket. So he pulled out all these cards which were pointing to a website. So they were evangelistic cards. So we'd just gone in through the kind of checkpoint and we were waiting for him to come through. Then we saw them leading him away. And so I tried to follow him, see where they took him and all this kind of thing. And eventually he came back and reported how they'd all asked him about these cards, started looking at the website and saying, well, this is really good. So we thought he was being interrogated, maybe imprisoned or something like that. And actually he was there witnessing to the police.
Hey guys, welcome back to Raw Mission. I'm Matt, your host for this podcast. Now today I've got Ben and Mike with me to talk about sharing Jesus with Muslims in Qatar during the World Cup just a couple of weeks ago. And it was about a year ago that some of our guys in the Swiss office began to dream about travelling out to Qatar during the World Cup tournament to use this unique gathering of the nations to share the gospel with fans from Qatar, Saudi, Morocco, Iran, Tunisia and Senegal, as well as with immigrant workers from countries like Pakistan, India and Bangladesh. And in the end, there were about 30 of us from many different countries who went with this goal, and 6 of us from here in the UK. And in this episode, you'll be able to hear just some of the many exciting stories from our time out there. Well, this is the episode I've been really excited about doing for the last few weeks. I've got Ben and Mike with me. Hi, guys.
Hi there.
Hey, great to be with you.
Yeah, good to see you guys. And we were only together in person just, a week ago now, maybe, in Qatar for the World Cup. And wow, we had such an amazing time. I've had Mike on the podcast before. I think my second or third episode. Mike, you shared stories about your time in Turkey, didn't you?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll press pause on you for the minute, but Ben is a new guest for us. So we're going to hear a little bit more from Ben at the beginning, just to hear his story, how he got thinking about global mission and God's heart for the nations. And then we'll get into the World Cup stories. So yeah, hi Ben, tell us a bit about your background and getting into all this.
Yeah, so I recently graduated from university in the UK. For me, growing up, I hadn't really considered what it meant to follow Jesus outside the UK until I was about 16, 17 years old. I remember I went to a conference that an organization called Open Doors were running, and they were talking about Christians in North Korea. And I remember sitting there thinking, I never considered Christians outside of my own country, let alone the other side of the world. And so they talked about the situation for our brothers and sisters out there being put in concentration camps, effectively. And whilst I didn't feel particularly stirred or didn't feel like anything dramatic happened during the meeting, I took away one of their World Watch List prayer maps for the 50 most difficult countries to follow Jesus. And I remember I was 17 at the time. I got back to my hometown and put this map above my bed. And it was bizarre because that evening I woke up at 2 or 3 in the morning, which in itself was a surprise because I'm usually a heavy sleeper. And the same thing happened the night after. And I thought, what is going on? And I just saw this map. I thought, okay, I'm awake. I might as well pray. So I just took this time in the night to start praying for these different countries. And it continued to happen over a period of 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, thankfully it stopped just before my exams were about to happen, praise the Lord. But I really felt like he did something in those 2 weeks. And so I reached out to Open Doors in the UK and joined a program they had called Activists, which was a chance to use your gifts, use your skills, which for me was public speaking, to be able to serve the church. But it was really there that the Lord began to stir my heart for the nations, began to hear these stories of people, brothers and sisters, laying down everything for the sake of the gospel. And that really culminated just before I started university. I had the privilege to go to Southeast Asia, where we spent the week with around 250 young believers, all from Muslim or Hindu backgrounds. And what struck me straight away was we heard some of them, they'd walked longer than we'd flown. So we'd flown 14 hours to get out there. And some of these young people had walked for a longer time just to be with other young believers.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, we got there. And I remember sitting one night, we didn't speak much Bengali, but they told us that our presence meant far more than our words could. And one by one, these young people, they stood up and they shared their story their testimony of what their faith in Jesus had cost them. Some of them up to 2 weeks before had been kicked out of their homes just for having a Bible and told, don't come back till you get rid of it. And even though we didn't understand, they couldn't understand much of what we were saying, I just remember they had this joy and this peace on their face that I couldn't explain. Their circumstances couldn't explain it. And so I remember coming back to the UK thinking, I cannot live my faith the same way. Here I am as a 17-year-old, afraid to share my faith, maybe afraid of being laughed at for the sake of the gospel. And here are these young people who are willing to leave behind their families. And so that for me was a really important moment. I knew I couldn't come back and live for Jesus the same way as before.
That's really powerful. Yeah, sometimes just getting out of our little bubbles, our little environments, our home churches that we've grown up in, traveling overseas, seeing the church in different cultures, seeing the challenges they face. Yeah, it can have a big impact on us, can't it? My gap here in India had a similar impact in a different way, but my faith really took off as I was, just away from everything I'd been used to growing up. We love Open Doors here at Frontiers as well. We feel very close to them. Wonderful organizations supporting the persecuted church, but also with Brother Andrew, such an evangelist. And I remember reading about him crossing the Iron Curtain with Bibles and then working in the Middle East. So yeah, we love Open Doors. Big shout out to them.
Yep. So I then moved to a different city for university, and the church I joined, one of the key things that struck me straight away was this kind of heart for the nations they carried. It was something I hadn't necessarily seen growing up as much. And yet I remember walking in on a Sunday morning, there was a guy from Ghana playing the drums, and there was all of this talk about what it means to reach out to the nations. And so through a number of different things, connecting with Frontiers as well was a huge part of the journey for me. I got to do the MomentumYes course with a number of other students. And so that heart that the Lord had been growing in prayer for the nations also became much more of a missional thing for the unreached, for Muslims in particular. And I remember in particular one night, which changed a lot of things in my city as a student, was we heard the testimony of a guy called Greg Livingston, who I'm sure some of the listeners know about. And he was telling us on a call how as a student, he's quite a funny guy. He told us as a student, he had a faith, but he was also kind of quite interested in more interested in the young women type of thing. But he heard that there was this overnight prayer meeting happening, and he said more out of pride than anything, he thought, I'll go along, I'll hear what they're doing. What have they got all night to pray about? And so he went along, and he said he arrived at this prayer gathering. It was not what he expected to see.
There were young people huddled around world maps on the floor. And this man called George Burwer walks up to him and says, what country are you claiming in prayer, brother? And he's like, at this moment, what is going on? But George says to him, you've got Libya. And so Greg, not knowing much about the country, he sits down, and there's this Bible verse on the wall saying the fields are ripe for harvest. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send out workers. And I'm sure as many listening to the podcast know, he then went on to become the founder of Frontiers and have a huge impact on Libya and many other Muslim countries for the gospel.
And so that really challenged us. I was listening to him share that story with a group of students from our university, and we thought, why don't we start doing the same thing? So a group of us students, we started to gather at 7 a.m. and we just simply had a world map. We spent some time in song worship, and then we would pray for an unreached group or an unreached people group around the world. And what was amazing was we did that for 7 or 8 weeks during the term, 5 or 6 of us gathering. And then we decided we wanted to keep doing it over the Christmas holidays. So we thought we would move it onto Zoom. And that was when a friend told me that he knew of other students at a university in a different part of the UK who were doing the exact same thing. So we thought, great, let's invite them along. And what was amazing was over 5 weeks during the Christmas break, we started as 2 university groups. And after 5 weeks, we had people joining us representing 6, 7 different universities. And so we really began to see that the Lord is stirring something in the UK in terms of student hearts for mission. And I really believe that prayer is the foundation that opens the doors. And it's what I believe is the reason why we now see many young people involved with different organizations who are saying, Lord, I want to give you everything. I want to go to the ends of the earth for you. And just to share one story from that time, which really encouraged me. I had a friend and through Open Doors, and he encouraged me one morning. He said that he'd been praying, and he reminded me of a verse, I think in Isaiah, where it talks about the Lord calling out his watchmen. And so my friend, he says to me, Ben, have you thought about asking the Lord if you can go on watchman duty during the night before you go to bed? And so I thought, okay, this sounds interesting. So that night before I went to bed, I prayed, Lord, I'm open, I'm available for whatever you want to do during the night in prayer. And then I did that for, I think, 2 or 3 nights. And on the third night, I will never forget it. I woke up at 2 or 3 in the morning, bleary eyed. I got on my knees and I just said, Lord, where do you want to direct my prayers? And I felt him say, pray for a lake in the northeast of Nigeria. Now, at this point, I had no other context other than that. And I thought, okay, what do I pray? And I just had this sense of danger for this lake in the northeast of Nigeria. And so began to pray for maybe 10, 15 minutes and then went back to bed. So in the morning, I thought that was interesting. I'd written it down in my diary. I did a search on Google and I found out that night, Boko Haram had a group crossing Lake Chad, which is the biggest lake in the northeast of Nigeria. And they'd been crossing that night. And I remember just being sat there thinking, wow, God really is looking for his people to be open and available to partner with him in prayer. And I will never know the impact of the prayers that night, probably until we reach eternity. But what a privilege that when we are open and available, God wants to use us in prayer in places where our feet cannot go. So that was such encouragement for me as a student.
Brilliant. Wow, Ben, thank you. That's a good challenge to all of us to be available for whatever God wants to do with us, whether it's going, whether it's praying. Wow, that's a great story. I hope it really encourages our listeners to lift up your eyes. And just consider the nations, consider the ends of the earth, not just our little Jerusalem where we live. Brilliant. Okay, well, let's fast forward a little bit just to this summer. Because I know, Ben, you've had a few more experiences. Even before the World Cup, you went out to the Middle East, didn't you? So, just give us a very short summary of some of the things you experienced over the summer.
Yeah, so having graduated, you have the freedom of being able to explore some different avenues. And for me, there was an opportunity to visit some friends of mine who are based in the Gulf. And they're currently serving in a place where the gospel is not yet proclaimed. It is totally unreached. There are no known local believers. And so for me, that was an opportunity to go somewhere totally different. I'd never been in a Islamic context like that before, and was privileged to spend 5 weeks over there. And there were so many different things to take away. I think one of the biggest lessons for me was going into the time out there. I knew, having spoken to people who've spent a significant amount of time in the Gulf before, that spiritually there is a battle, and to be prepared for that. But I think the reality of it was very different to what I anticipated before going. I was staying in a room with one other friend, and both of us, we had experiences where we woke up quite early in the morning, 3:55 a.m., having had usually really bad dreams, often around shame or condemnation. And before even having a chance to process this, the call to prayer is ringing out of the mosque, maybe 10 meters away from our room, across the alley. And for me, I remember the first time this happened, I just thought, okay, this is not a coincidence. And I just thought, if he is going to be singing the praises of his God, I should sing the praises of my God. And so there were mornings where I just felt like I had to sing. So as this young man is ringing out the call to prayer, he has a microphone, I don't, but I had the Spirit of God just singing God's praise. But I think it was a real eye-opener for me that there is a spiritual war, that even in these countries where outwardly, I mean, there's so much beauty in the Middle East physically, that's wonderful, generous, hospitable people, but there is a real battle for men and women's souls. And I think encounters like that really drive it home.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And how did you find being there and just connecting with people, from such different backgrounds? You're from the north of England, and these guys are presumably Arab speakers in a much more, I don't know if it was a poor or a wealthy environment you were in, but how did you find just getting connections, having conversations without Arabic, even though you've started learning it, haven't you?
Yeah, it was definitely a poorer environment. I think going into it, was really encouraged actually, because one of the scriptures that I come back to when I think about engaging with people from different cultures, which is something I love doing, is what Paul says. He says, "I've become all things to all people in order that I might win as many as possible." And so going out into this different cultural context, as you say, different language, but just being there and attempting to begin to learn their language means a lot to them. A lot of them, they ask the question, why are you here? Why have you come from your country, which is so rich and you're comfortable in many ways? Why have you come to our country where there's poverty? There's definitely not the privileges that we have, even down to our passport, for example. And the only answer I could give at the time as well, I love this region and I love the people, which is true because God, he loves these people. And again, a big lesson for me was, I was really encouraged by Brother Andrew actually in this. He used to have an acronym for Islam where he used to say, "I sincerely love all Muslims." And I think going out to this place, one of the realizations I had is that it is only a love for these people that comes from God's heart that will sustain long-term mission out there. I was privileged to meet people who've spent the last almost 20 years sowing and praying for breakthrough in this area where there isn't yet any known believers. And I think it'd be fair to say what is sustaining them, what is keeping them going, is a love for the people that God has placed them around. So that challenged me to come back here and to see my heart grow for Muslims in prayer.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Brilliant. Let's move on to the World Cup and the Qatar trip. Mike, we'll bring you in now and give us an overview, Mike, of why we did this. Why did we do this trip? Was it a bit of a jolly, go watch some football, or what was the purpose behind it?
Well, there was probably a little bit of that. So there was 6 of us guys went, and we, most of us, well, pretty much all of us, we do like football. But really, we just saw this as a unique opportunity. I mean, I've never been to a World Cup before, but the fact that the World Cup was in Qatar, and which is just a little country on the side of Saudi Arabia near Iran, and those countries are qualified for the World Cup. We just thought this is a unique opportunity where for a month they're going to bring in people from so many nations, and the place is going to be crowded, and there's going to be lots of opportunities to share the good news of Jesus with people that have come from some of these countries that have very little or no access to the gospel. So we just wanted to be there and make the most of every opportunity that God gave us to share something of Jesus with the people we met.
Yeah, that's right. I remember when one of the young guys said to us, Mike, "Hey, do you want to join us on this trip?" I thought, yeah, wow, what a opportunity. It's the first time a World Cup's been in a Muslim country, first time in a country where so many people are unreached and don't have access to the gospel. Because Qatar, most people won't know this, but it's illegal to share your faith there openly. They hardly have churches. I think there is an international compound where foreigners can worship. Maybe 1 or 2 house churches have been allowed to operate. But overall, it's a very tough place to be a Christian. Certainly, the gospel is not readily available for most Qataris. So yeah, we were excited about that. And the idea of just going out there with some young guys like Ben here to show them what evangelism can look like in a Muslim context, even when it's banned, and how that might operate.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was one of the highlights, is just going with a team, including these young guys, and, you know, kind of passing the baton on to the next generation. Not that we're planning on stopping here, but 3 of us guys who are a little bit older, 3 younger guys, and just doing this together and just seeing the boldness of the young guys was a huge encouragement for me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because you went out for, what was it, about a week? And Ben, you'd been out there a bit earlier.
Yes, that's correct. I've been there for 3 weeks. The reason for that was really privileged. Some amazing doors open to be a volunteer with FIFA hosting the World Cup, and I was volunteering at a stadium and was actually the only Brit other than some of the leaders at the stadium. And so that in itself was pretty incredible. Lots of volunteers from pretty much every nation, many people coming from India and Nepal, but also from Saudi Arabia and Oman, with them being so close to the host country. So I think, as Mike said, it was a pretty amazing opportunity, given that usually a World Cup is spread out across 7 or 8 different cities. And yet here in Qatar was everyone in one place, like an hour's drive from one end to the other, all the nations. It's amazing.
Definitely. So Ben, tell us some of the opportunities you had with Muslims, particularly perhaps from unreached places.
Yeah, so as a volunteer, there were a number of opportunities to see some people again and again, day after day, working together. And 2 moments that really stand out for me. The first was I was on shift one time and I was helping to check tickets before a match. And I was stood working with this young girl, a similar age. And she told me that she was from Iran. And yet I noticed straight away that she wasn't wearing a hijab, which was interesting. And so we began to talk more and more. And she kind of disclosed to me that she'd become disillusioned with her faith. She didn't believe in there being a God. But also she said to me, which was very brave of her, she said that she'd felt like she'd seen the real face of her religion. And given everything that's happening in Iran at the moment, I could definitely see what she was saying. But what was amazing was that we had almost 2 hours together that evening. And as I got to share some of the stories of Isa, of Jesus, and the way, for example, that he treated women, the way that he welcomed people in, I just noticed every time we talked about Jesus, her face would light up. And so it was a privilege to be able to talk more about that, to talk about our need for God. And one moment which I loved was we were talking about how God would relate to us. And at one moment, this friend, she said, just during our conversation, if God was real, surely he would want to reveal himself to us. This young girl from a Muslim background, I just thought, wow, there is the heart of the gospel, that Jesus did come down to reveal the heart of God to us. And so before leaving her, I had the opportunity to pray for her and said that I'd continue to pray for her, that the Lord would reveal himself. So that was one really awesome opportunity. And the other, which is a little bit different, there were 2 friends which I got to know particularly well over the 3 weeks. We were volunteering together at every shift, and they were probably 2 of the closest friends I met during the time out there. They kind of knew I had this faith, but it didn't really feel like the conversations were going very far. But I remember I encouraged some of my prayer supporters back home to be praying for them. And one morning we were on our way to our shift, maybe a couple of days before I was due to leave the country. And they said to me, "So Ben, why are you really here?" And so I said, well, look, I do like football, but really my passion is for Jesus. He's changed my life. And it was amazing because the next 2-3 hours, we just had this opportunity to share honestly and from a place of authenticity with one another. We discussed a wide range of things, but my heart was always to kind of bring it back to the stories of Jesus and how we see him respond to different situations. And these friends, they said to me at different points, wow, I've never been able to have conversations like this without arguing. And this guy was from Saudi Arabia, and he also said that didn't know there were people like you in Europe. But I think what made it really special was, obviously, as a team of 6, we'd spent a lot of time during our week together, kind of with that first contact evangelism, forming connections, seeing if we could sow some seeds in people's hearts and minds. But what I also loved was this opportunity, which rather than the one-off encounter, was a friendship that the Lord had developed. And for me, being able to have these conversations coming from a place of love for these friends. I remember at one point we talked about how we can't force anyone into faith, but we also acknowledged if what we believe to be the truth is really true, then surely we share it with the people we love. And so it was a wonderful privilege to pray for those 2 dear friends. They really appreciated it. And I think for me, coming back, it is the fact that I do genuinely love and care for these friends. That is why I want to keep praying for them, that they'll encounter Jesus one day.
And the beauty of today is you can stay in touch, isn't it? You know, you got WhatsApp, you
Absolutely.
got all the other means. And so, yeah, if God continues to work in their hearts and raise questions, then yeah, you're right there. They know someone who follows Jesus, they can ask that. That's so cool. Sharing this podcast is a really good way to encourage more people to get involved with God's great mission, whether locally or globally. So please do help us get the word out there. If you use an iPhone, it's pretty easy to write us a review, and that has a big impact on how many people can find us. Alternatively, you could share one of your favourite episodes with your church family or home group or CU, either in person or on WhatsApp or social media. Thanks, guys, and now let's get back to the podcast. Yeah, Mike, any highlights from you that you'd like to share?
Yeah, lots. The trip was really birthed in a lot of prayer. We had a big WhatsApp group of people that had signed up to receive daily updates from us. And so it was good to know there was, I don't know, maybe 150 people praying for us every day while we were there. And we just saw God open up so many doors to share with people. In some ways, it was the easiest sharing of faith I've ever done. And there we were in Qatar, you know. So also we actually met every morning as a team. We went into the local mosque and we sat around in a circle on the carpet, and we had a kind of a time in the Bible together and a time praying together before we went out for the day. And so we took public transport to most places. Public transport was free during the World Cup, which was great. And we were really treated well by the Qataris. So when we got on a bus, we'd all sit separately, and I would sit there and just pray, Lord, would you bring someone to sit next to me that you want to speak to? And so often I was sitting next to a guy from Saudi or Morocco or Tunisia or Bangladesh, and get talking with them. And we would just tell people, look, we're here to enjoy the football and to pray for people. And that was kind of our entry point in. And so we would get into a good conversation, often a spiritual conversation. And sometimes I would use what we call the miracle question, which is, if Allah could do a miracle in your life, what would you ask for? And so many people, they would stop and think and then say, I want to go to heaven. And so that was an amazing opportunity to say to them, look, there's a way of getting there. And it's not through getting religious points, but there is a way, and share something with them. And then most people, we gave them a card, which was send them to a website where they could discover more. I mean, we just had one-off conversations with so many people. We also got into taxis occasionally when we were coming back late at night. It was just a lot quicker than public transport. And the good thing with people using sat navs on their phone is you can see exactly how long you got in the taxi. So often I would sit in the front, there'd be three guys in the back, they'd all be praying hard, and I'd try and have a conversation with a taxi driver, sometimes asking that same question. And I remember one particular taxi driver, when I asked him, what would you ask God for if he would do a miracle in your life? He just started crying, which was a little bit unnerving because he was driving us at the time. But he talked about his family back home in Bangladesh, and you just think so many of these workers in these countries, they go there to earn a little bit of money to send home. And he was so missing his family in Bangladesh, and he was talking about his mother. And so we got to just talk about that. And then when we got to our destination, we just said, look, we'd love to pray for you. Can we do that? And so the taxi driver would stop, and we prayed for him. We prayed for his family, for his mother. And there was a real sense of God's presence in the car. Now, that's just one conversation I'm talking about, but we had that most evenings, something like that. And we just really sensed God's presence was with us. So, yeah, all glory to God. He just opened up so many doors for us to share with people that probably would never meet another Christian in their life or another follower of Jesus in their life. You know, we don't know that, but the sort of places they're from is very unlikely they will. Yeah. So to be the first is a great privilege and a great responsibility.
That's right. Yeah. I remember just a few days ago, one of the guys on the trip thought, let's shade in the different countries on the map of the kind of conversations and gospel engagements that we had. And I think it was about 24 or 25 different nations that were represented from conversations we'd had, giving them a little bit of gospel literature or website to go to watch, some animated videos about Jesus or whatever it was. But yeah, there were so many, weren't there? I estimate about 200 to 300 mini gospel opportunities, and then dozens and dozens of the deeper conversations.
Yeah, I mean, one of the team members when we first got there, I remember him saying, wow, this is like the day of Pentecost, that all the nations are gathered together in one place. And that, as we said earlier, is really unique for a World Cup, that actually everyone was in one city. And what was so nice is because there was an alcohol ban, a general alcohol ban, there were so few Europeans there. And so no fighting, and everyone just got on. There was some really good banter between supporters, but it was so good because actually most of the people there were from Muslim nations or Brazil and Argentina, and Mexico. But so it was amazing just to have that opportunity to, with almost everyone you met, they would be from one of these Muslim countries.
One of the good questions that I've been asked since returning home is, what about the longer term impact? Are you able to say that God, maybe is at work in someone's lives and you're able to follow that up in the future? I said, well, for a lot of the encounters we had, we won't know. It was very fast. They get something in their hands to take away, maybe watch later, and we can just pray that that'll have an impact we'll never know about. But there were, like in some of the stories you guys have just mentioned already, there were these encounters where we've exchanged phone numbers, we've made genuine friends. And for me, a couple of the highlights were, one Turkish guy ended up praying with him in a mosque, and he was so moved and almost in tears, just able to listen to his story and pray for his family that are going through some real struggles. And I think initially he wasn't very interested in talking about the gospel, but as he hung out with us the next day, wanted to come and hang out with the team and had lunch with us and so on. We ended up doing a Bible study, didn't we, with him in a Bedouin tent, which was super cool. And we were just doing our usual daily Bible study, but he joined in and he started interacting with the parable of the prodigal son. And I could see he was really listening, really asking questions. So that was definitely one of my highlights. And I feel that, Mike, if you're even going back to Turkey and that region of Turkey, because you travel to Turkey still quite a lot, who knows, there might be an opportunity to visit him and his family, and that could develop into something else. And for me, the second example of that is a Saudi friend that I made, and he's still WhatsApping this week saying, when are you coming? Please come. Tell one of the other guys, if he's coming to Saudi, he must stay in my home. My wedding's coming up in May next year. So these kind of things are real highlights, like Ben said, just developing some of those quick contacts into deeper friendships.
Yeah. One other thing we did was just either give some scriptures or encourage people to download the scriptures. And I remember after watching one of the matches, we were coming home on the bus. It was about 2:00 in the morning because in Qatar, the late matches finished about midnight. And he was from Bangladesh. He'd come over to watch the football, and we got talking. And I said, you know that the Bible's in your language, don't you? And he said, I had no idea. And so he just downloaded the YouVersion of the Bible, and I showed him how to download the Bangladesh translation. And he was so excited to see that the Bible is in his language. He's never read it before. So there's all these little ways we try to give something to people to go away with. And some of the cards that we handed out, which was pointing to a website called journeytotruth.tv. And we gave out dozens and dozens and dozens of those. So, yeah.
Yeah, Ben, did you want to chip in with something?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about us going as a team as well, as Mike shared earlier, people slightly older in years, still youthful in heart. And then those of us younger guys, students at the moment, one of the privileges as well was that we had a lot of opportunities to kind of drop each other in it, you could say. Like I remember there was one day where I met a Pakistani guy. He was on shift as a security guard at the stadium I was working at, and we got talking. There was just a real gentleness and a real friendliness to this guy, and he wanted to hang out. And so I said, well, I've got this friend, he's arriving in a few days, and he speaks Urdu. So the next opportunity we had, we got to meet up with him again. I think he led us into a stadium without some tickets, actually, even though we had them. But
yeah.
But I was also really encouraged and found it really insightful to see some of the ways that you guys, you and Mike, were able to engage, especially with some of the kind of trained guys, the imams. I know we visited a mosque one day, and I remember
Mm.
them kind of reeling off some of the lines they'd rehearsed. And well, one story stands out in particular, and it was with you actually, Matt. We visited the mosque one day in Qatar, and we were being shown around by this Somali guy, and he led us into the mosque itself. I remember he sat us down, not even at the back, but at kind of the front right of the mosque, with maybe a dozen guys who were praying on the floor. And he began to tell us how he believed that the Injil, the gospel, had been changed or wasn't complete. And then I remember I loved your response, Matt, which I think you'd probably used before, but you went, don't say such a thing. Are you saying that the Almighty God would let his own word be changed? And you went on to tell him this story. You said, if I was a father and I gave my son my holy book, and if he took it outside and it starts to rain, and he comes back inside but leaves the book outside, if I come and I see that the book is wet, whose fault is it? It's my fault as the father. And you turn to the Somali and you're saying, would you say the Almighty God would let his own word be corrupted? Never. And I remember looking around the room at this point, and all those dozen guys who'd been praying, they're all looking up, eyes fixed on you with their mouths wide open. So I think it was really insightful. Yeah, for us as younger guys to be able to see that, but also to recognize the respect that there is among the younger generation in the Gulf towards the older generation that maybe we don't see here. I remember young guys who would say to you, I don't read the Injil because it's corrupted. And as you prodded a little bit deeper, they'd say, well, that's just what my imam has told me. But I think part of that was down to the age, a little bit of grey stubble maybe, whereas some of those younger guys, they probably would not have respected what we had to say as much. So I think that was the beauty of having a diverse and multi-generational team.
Yeah, definitely. And then, Mike, it wasn't all plain sailing, was it? We did have the odd encounter with the local police. Do you want to share a bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier the cards that we had, and one of our guys entering the stadium had a big wad of those cards in his pocket. The police asked to look at what was in his pocket, so he pulled out all these cards which were pointing to a website. So they were evangelistic cards. So we'd just gone in through the kind of checkpoint, and we were waiting for him to come through. Then we saw them leading him away. And so I tried to follow him, see where they took him and all this kind of thing. And eventually he came back and reported how they'd all asked him about these cards, started looking at the website and saying, well, this is really good. So we thought he was being interrogated, maybe imprisoned or something like that. And actually he was there witnessing to the police in another location. So anyway, he came back and he got into the game. He actually offered to throw the cards away if he wasn't allowed to take them into the stadium. And they said, no, don't take them. Don't throw them away. Just put them in storage and then get them afterwards. And so they let him take them.
Didn't they tell him at one point, oh yeah, you can't hand these out in the stadium or anything, but just go out into the fan parks, hand them out there?
Yeah, they said it's fine to hand them out outside the stadium, but not inside the stadium. So yeah, that was an interesting one. And then there was another occasion where we went to visit the mosque that you were talking about earlier. I think we were in different groups at the time. And on the way in, we got talking to two security guards and started sharing a little bit with them, had a nice conversation with them. Then it got on to Jesus and the uniqueness of Jesus. You know, if Jesus is only a prophet, why did he have a virgin birth? Why was he the only one that did miracles and crucified and rose from the dead? And this kind of thing. And at the end of the conversation, this same young guy that had been led away, he gave a verse to the security guard, which said, this is Jesus talking, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but have the light of life. And then underneath it said, God bless you and your family. And that was all it was on a piece of paper. And then later he went into the mosque, and as he came out, there were some police waiting for him, asking, did you give this piece of paper out? And so he did. And he was very bold with these policemen, saying to them, do you not fear God? Why are you afraid of this piece of paper? And they started eventually apologizing to him and let him go. But after that, all of us were being followed a little bit by some policemen. So we were just a little bit more cautious about what we did. But it also gave us, it was only the last 2 days, it also gave us an opportunity to follow up some of the people we'd met earlier and meet with them. And so we're just thankful to God for all these different experiences, that it was really in some ways quite easy to share faith there and get into spiritual conversations. But at the same time, especially for the young guys, just seeing the authorities coming against them to some extent, all these things are good experiences and good training actually for what God might have for them in the future.
Yeah. I mean, in hindsight, yeah, it's like, wow, okay, that was amazing. God protected those guys, gave them faith to speak, gave them the right things to say with respect in front of the police who were questioning them. But yeah, at the time, there was an hour or so, wasn't there, where we'd got these WhatsApp messages saying, oh, the police are holding us back. They're looking at our IDs. They're taking photographs. We think they're following us now. In fact, they're definitely following us now. We can see them handing over, and to other people, plainclothes policemen following us. So there was an hour or so, wasn't there, where we were a little concerned for the two young guys, maybe just that they were okay, that they weren't too worried by all this. But yeah, actually, of course, when we met up with them later, they were fine and they dealt with the situation brilliantly. I think it was the next day I got a message from somebody saying, oh, do you realize the journeytotruth.tv website is not working? I thought, oh. And so I looked at it. Yeah, okay, it's not working. Maybe the Qatari government have blocked it as a website because they found out that we're using it and handing out all these cards. But then the next morning, I messaged someone in England and other countries, and I said, hey, is the website over there working for you? And they said, no, it's not. And actually, our friend who runs the website said, yeah, no, it's been the victim of a major attack. So they've actually brought the whole website down. They've crashed the website. And he said, I'll get it back up. And he did. Within 24 hours, he got the website up again and running and put in more firewalls and so on. But that made me think, wow, we've caused some ripples here. The government, the police, they're looking at this website. They're concerned about it. But it's very much part of, the spiritual battle. They're very friendly people, but there is such opposition to the good news there.
And I think reflecting on those experiences in particular, which, as you say, at the time can feel quite uncomfortable. I think now that we have left that nation, I think one of the questions that I've been reflecting on this week is, well, why? Why is there such an opposition? Why do these governments feel like they need to put up as many barriers as possible in many ways to protect Islam, to protect their religion? And just listening to a talk this week and reminded of the fact, actually, ultimately, it is a fear. It is a fear of the word of God and a fear of the impact that the word of God can have to change and liberate and, transform hearts and minds across the region. And so I think coming away, it's also a reminder of the power of the gospel and the power that raised Jesus from the dead living in us as his followers.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So yeah, guys, any further stories as we wrap this up that we want to share with the listeners?
Before we went to Qatar, we thought it'd be useful to have some tools to get into conversations with people. So I actually produced a banner, which said in English, it said, come and receive prayer. And then in Arabic, just above it, it said a station where we can pray with you. And I had said to the guys, let's not put it up on the first day. Let's just see, get a lie of the land. But even with my experience, I got a little bit excited. And so towards the end of the first day, I put the banner up in a very public place and we waited. And some people came along and sat by the banner, and I got chatting with them, prayed with them until a policeman came along and started taking photos of it and then asking us to remove it. And that was probably the start of the attacks on the journeytotruth.tv, because one of the young guys with me, he was wearing a t-shirt advertising the website on the back. And he asked one of the young guys for his identification. And he was very brave. He said, I'd really rather not give it to you at this time, if that's okay. And so he persuaded the policeman that he shouldn't give it. But the policeman took plenty of photos of the back of his t-shirt with his website on. So sometimes it's not just that the older guys have got all the experience and do the right things, but we make mistakes too. We didn't use that banner again just because it was so easy to get into conversations with people. And I'm sure any of the listeners who got Muslim friends or work colleagues or whatever, it's so easy to get into spiritual conversations with people because we're talking with people who already believe in a creator God and already have a faith and pray and do things like that. I find it much easier to talk to Muslims about faith than I do to my white English neighbors. And so I'd encourage anyone who's listening, like if you've got Muslim friends, just pray for them and ask God to give you opportunities to tell your testimony, to speak into their lives, and maybe even to pray with them. I think everyone we offered prayer to in Qatar, and I'm talking about dozens of people between us, everyone we offered prayer to accepted, except for the one guy, the security guard outside the mosque, who kind of shopped us. But people are hungry for God's activity in their life. And so I'd encourage people to do that.
Yeah, definitely. It was such an amazing time, wasn't it? Such a joy, such a privilege. And we'd encourage our listeners as well to get in touch with us if they want to do a short-term trip like this. We do prayer trips to other countries around the world and, evangelism trips. And so, do get in touch with us if this is something that you think you'd like to be a part of. We'd love to hear from you. Ben, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think coming back to the whole idea of scattering seeds, it was really exciting as well to see glimpses of what the Lord was doing. I remember one day decided as a social experiment to wear a piece of Middle Eastern attire that I'd picked up on a previous weeks away. And it was amazing to have people from that nation come running towards me on the metro. Mashallah, I see what you're wearing. And I remember in particular one guy, we began to talk to him after he approached us. We shared a Journey to Truth card with him, and he said to us, I'm going to share this with all of my friends. And I remember you saying, Matt, wow, these are the people we need to pray for, because if he honors his word and does that, imagine what it means for his nation. If him and all of his friends begin exploring who this Jesus is, who is Isa al-Masih, that can change everything.
Oh, man. Yeah, I remember that guy in the middle of the bazaar. Great. Okay, guys, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you for being with me today. It was such a joy to be on the trip with you guys. And let's keep praying that the Lord will use us here too, as we're back in the UK with Muslims in our cities and towns here.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Ben. It was really good to see you guys again.
All right. God bless, guys. Bye. Thanks so much for joining us today, guys. For more, check us out on our website, frontiers.org.uk, and on all social media platforms @FrontiersUK. Have a great week and make sure you don't miss our next episode.